we stayed together. After 2 or 3 months, we said maybe within 2 months we will be liberated, but never thought that we would be confined for 2 years and a half.
Sitting quietly and waiting to die is not an option for people who are young and full of life, and who would rather risk the chance of going out in a blaze of glory. Beneath the quiet surface of camp life, a bold plan was taking shape, one that was extremely dangerous, but that might hold the key to opening contact with the outside world and improving conditions within the camp. From the winter of 1943 to 1944, the struggle for freedom entered a new phase as the secret plan was put into action.
You know, for young people like I was, 31, after 2 years we had enough of life in camp. So we tried different means to go out.
32-year-old Englishman Lawrence Tipton was a former telegraph operator and lieutenant in the British Navy, and had been working at Tianjin B.A. Tobacco Company when he was sent to Weixian. He spoke good Chinese and was the camp's unofficial postman, responsible for transmitting messages from the outside. "24-year-old American Arthur Hummel had been a teacher at Beijing Furen Middle School. 40 years later, he would begin another distinguished career in China, a subject for later in our story.
We arranged for Tipton and Hummel to go out. And the idea was that they would keep in touch with troops in Chongqing or with guerrillas, and perhaps help us send some food or some medicines for us in the camp.
To make sure they would be safe after their escape and that they would be able to communicate with the camp, they had Zhang Xingtai contact local anti-Japanese guerrilla forces. Zhang once again was generous with his assistance, and after several attempts was able to contact guerrilla forces active in the Weixian area. On May 4, 1944, the guerrilla forces sent a letter into the camp, expressing sympathy for their struggle and offering both encouragement and assistance for the planned escape plan. While the secret plan was getting underway, another much larger secret plan was being hatched as well. In November 1943, at the Tehran Conference, Allied leaders decided to open a second front in Europe. On June 6, 1944, Allied forces landed in Normandy, successfully opening the second front. The German defeat signaled a new stage in the global war against fascism, and victory came closer and closer. At this moment, behind the high walls and electric fences, Tipton, Hummel, fathers Henked and De Jigger, and their partner Hoi Chu nervously awaited nightfall. The success of their whole plan would depend on what happened over the next few hours. After weeks and months of painstaking preparation, on the evening of June 10, 1944, their plan sprang into action.
That was alongside the wall, and it was just at 10 o'clock in the evening, that was the lights out. We had to watch Japanese guards who come in the main street.
To make their escape, they waited for the nightly changing of the guards. Every night, during the changing of the guards, the Japanese would turn off the electricity for 10 minutes to prevent accidents and injuries. This was their only chance to climb over the electric fence. Tipton and Hummel climbed a water tower in the sports field where they waited for the changing of the guards. Once the electricity was off, they quickly slipped over the fence. Meanwhile, local guerrilla troops were waiting for them 2 miles away. After their escape, Tipton and Hummel were able to increase communication between the camp and the outside, despite the best efforts of the Japanese. After meeting up with the guerrilla forces, they were taken to the headquarters of the 4th Column of the Shandong Jiangsu Army, some 100 miles northeast of the camp. Jiang Ziqi was a teacher at the Siwei Middle School in Changyi in the guerrilla forces territory. In the winter of 1944, at Tipton and Hummel's request, she traveled through Qingdao and Weixian at great personal risk and successfully brought back information about what was going on in the camp after their escape. She met with them secretly 3 times in a farmhouse in Changyi.
第一次见洪安氏和地兰，他就是穿的是小棉袄，那是个冬天，棉袄棉裤。吃呢，我记得有一次是一个是大白菜炒肉，一个是大葱炒肉，这么2个菜，这2个菜就很不简单。那时候待在那这个根本这个猪肉根本买不到，那抗战的期间，这个外国人是最怕中国这个大蒜味和大葱味。我就开始往西说，我说这个中国饭你们那个习惯吗？吃习惯吗？弄什么？他们就说，哎，中国饭好吃，中国饭香。第3次就换地方。
Out of concern for their own safety, Tipton and Hummel changed locations frequently, always under the protection of the guerrilla troops and the local people. Today, Xia Xiuzhen is 82. She and her family still remember hosting the 2 foreigners. After the 2 foreigners arrived, they asked for a table to work on. Other than that, they had little interaction with the Xia family. The Xia sisters recalled that their time in Dazhang was mostly spent writing.
有一个在这服务的一个人，他拿起笔抽的，拿起笔抽的，我挺生气的。那么我就问他，你那个拿起笔抽的干什么？他说给那2个人写信。我说写信怎么是笔抽的？他说写这个信吧，那就是转到他们那个国家，他也没说哪个国家，转到他们这个国家去嘛。这个信上是要武器，要了武器的帮着打1本。
Xia Shuzhen's family was one of the Chinese families that took in Tipton and Hummel. They never asked for names or demanded for anything in return, even when they found out that one of the young men they sheltered had become the U.S. ambassador to China. When the Japanese found out about the escape, they launched a frantic search and cracked down on the camp, adding to the sense of tension and uncertainty. During this period, Tipton and Hummel stayed in the area around the camp, observing and facilitating contact between the camp and the outside world. They sent large amounts of information about the camp to the government in Chongqing and tried their best to raise money and supplies. In December 1944, a plane loaded with supplies left for Chang'e, home of the Weixian area guerrilla troops.
那天是个雪夜，下雪很大。当时这个11点多钟的时候，我们听着这个来了飞机了。当时大家都不得这个戒备。不过当时有一想，日本鬼儿来袭击我们这些部队，他用不着黑警。白天我们当时他的飞机来袭击的话，我们也无可奈何。当时也就很郁闷。他头一趟就是来演示这个地点，飞过去没投，接着又要回去，又来，看了样子好像这会儿就投了，他们投的很准确。4个行李，4个包裹，这4个包裹，2个是一部电台，电台和这个自动发电机那2个，这8个有2个药品包裹。有几个就是钞票。
After considerable efforts, the supplies airlifted in by the U.S. Air Force finally made it into the camp. For the inmates who had suffered shortages of vital supplies for so long, they were truly a godsend. Right after this airlift, Japanese troops from Fangzishang village and Gaomi Island combined to attack the guerrilla forces in Weixian, and a large-scale eradication program began. The darkest hour had arrived, but the camp's inmates still had no idea how long they would have to wait for the dawn. But the darkest hour for the children of the camp came when they lost their beloved Uncle Eric.
About 1945, January, he became, shall I say, very slow. He's walking slow. And he kept saying, I don't know what's going on in my head. Something's going on in my head. I don't know what it is. And he went into the hospital, and the doctors thought it was, tumor, but they had no equipment to know.
Joyce remembered that the first symptoms of Liddil's illness were terrible headaches, followed by memory loss. For this, he sought refuge in his favorite book.
Charles Dickens' A Tale of Two Cities, and the last chapter of that is a very beautiful. The last words I remember were, "It is a far, far better thing I do than ever I have done before. It is a far, far greater rest than I have ever been before." So he learned, actually the last 3 chapters, he learned off by heart because of that sacrifice of one person for another, which he found very moving.
Liddil summoned his competitive spirit and recited passages from the Bible to help him focus and to strengthen his memory, and to allow him to take care of the children who depended on him and whom he could never forget. On a cold winter morning in 1945, Liddil went to see Stephen.
He said, "It's now winter, January, and you have no shoes." So he said, "Please use these." And his running shoes were wrapped up in a piece of cloth. They were very worn out, but not, my own shoes are completely worn out. And he had taken string and had mended these shoes so that I could wear them. But I used them, and about 3 weeks after he gave them to me, he went into hospital.
On February 21, 1945, Joyce came to the hospital as usual to see Uncle Eric.
We all used to visit him in visiting hours, but I had my book with me. We were talking about it, and all of a sudden, in the middle of saying surrender, he had it was a spasm or a fit, and his head went back, and he started to shake, and I rushed off to call the nurse, and the nurse came in and put the curtains around his bed.
Joyce waited outside the doctor's office for what seemed like days, clutching the notebook in which she had kept track of his temperature.
He died soon after that. As far as I know, he did not become conscious again after. And of course I was feeling so terrible already. I was crying. I couldn't believe it. None of us in the camp could believe it at all. And it was as if the light had gone out of the camp. Everybody loved him so much. And it was just desolation for many of the teenagers that loved him so much. And adults too, they were openly crying, and everybody in the camp went to the funeral, and it was.
It was a cold Tuesday morning. Bone-chilling winds swirled the snow. Eric's friends and co-workers carried a crude coffin, followed by an honor guard, and then by his students, who formed a procession behind.
I was one of the pallbearers. You know, we carried the coffin. There are only 12 of us. I suppose I was one of the few, and I wore his running shoes. They're getting very worn out. But that was in February 1945. His wife and children never knew he died. They never heard this news.
For Stephen, Eric's friendship was the gift of a lifetime. His simple faith taught his students about love and tolerance, and made a deep impact on Stephen's own life.
He said, in the prison camp, I began getting up 15 minutes early to pray for the Japanese and the Japanese guards, Kempeitai, you know, the Japanese police. And he told us this, and then he challenged us to pray for the Japanese. He told us that if you pray for the people you don't like, he said, you pray for people you like. If you pray for people you don't like, then they don't change, but you change.
The conscientious efforts of the camp's teachers helped make their students' childhoods as normal and as enriching as possible. Out of the flames of war, they crafted something beautiful. For their students, this is a debt that can never be repaid. As spring arrived in 1945, the grieving inmates could only wait and endure. As time wore on, the inmates grew restless for change. And with the help of Tipton and Hummel on the outside, good news began trickling into the camp.
As the war was being won by the Allied forces, the Chinese with the Americans and the British, then we began to practice the national anthems of the different countries. But we never dared play the tune. We just played the lower parts. So we practiced all this so that when the war ended, we'd be able to play all these national anthems one after the other.
The Salvation Army Band blended the Chinese, US, British, and Russian national anthems together to make a victory melody, which they practiced over and over every Tuesday night in anticipation of the coming victory. Just to confuse the guards, they added some Christian hymns into the mix. With victory in sight, English inmate Joey and former Zhifu school teacher Jenny finally decided to get married.
In May 1945, when it looked fairly clear that the war was coming to an end fairly soon, from all the little bits of information we got, we were married. In fact, Joyce's sister was married 2 weeks before.
3 consecutive weddings brought some relief and happiness to the camp. And along with the weddings came some very good news. On May 8, 1945, Germany announced its unconditional surrender, signaling the liberation of continental Europe, leaving only Japan left standing. All of Europe was awash in a sea of joy. As news of the victory made its way over the camp's high walls, the inmates burst into celebration. 2 young men who couldn't contain their happiness found a special way to celebrate.
And they went up to the top of Block 24 and they rang the bell. Now, we didn't know that ringing that bell meant that the prisoners had rioted, and they must bring soldiers from Qingdao or whatever.
This monumentous event occurred on Joey and Jenny's wedding night, a night that no one will ever forget.
And of course, when the camp wasn't being attacked, then they decided that maybe some people had escaped, so they had roll call, 2 o'clock in the morning.
Tensions ran high at roll call, more so than any time since Tipton and Hummel's escape. The inmates waited nervously in the dark, all except 7-year-old Janet, who found the whole affair to be curious and more than a little exciting.
For me, it was just, it was marvelous because for once I was out in the middle of the night, because otherwise it was curfew and I couldn't go out. I never saw the moon. I saw the sun. I remember looking at the setting sun, but I don't remember the moon.
By then, US forces had conquered Iwo Jima and Okinawa and were moving toward the Japanese mainland. Victory was close at hand. In early August, the US dropped atomic bombs on Hiroshima and Nagasaki. On August 15, 1945, the Japanese emperor accepted the Potsdam Proclamation, accepting surrender to the Allies. The Second Great World War, involving 61 nations and over 80% of the world's population, and claiming 60 million lives, was finally over.
There were some little rumors going round camp that something very important had happened and the war was finished, but we weren't sure. On the 16th, more rumors were going round, and on the 17th, the head of our discipline committee stood at the door of the discipline house office and read out that the Japanese had surrendered.
The rumors that Margaret refers to were a special part of life in the camp. They were eagerly awaited and often transmitted important information, including the news of the end of the war, which arrived on August 17, 1945.
In August 1945, August 17th, we were going about our normal business. I was in the room I was then living in with my wife, the top floor of the hospital, looking north, and suddenly we heard the throb of an aeroplane coming closer.
The sound of the airplane's engines grew louder and louder, and a bomber appeared, first circling and then gradually coming down to land near the camp.
Came and came closer and closer, and we're all looking up. And you have to realize our camp was covered with acacia trees, all of it. It was beautiful, but we were totally camouflaged, so nobody knew we were there. And all of a sudden we saw this plane drop down, POW on the wings, that's right, and a big American Red Cross on the fuselage. We're free. And we got it jumping up, down, screaming, crying, laughing, hugging each other, and the plane took off. They hadn't seen us.
The U.S. Air Force emblem on the side of the plane sent the camp into a frenzy. That moment marked a turning point in the lives of every man, woman, and child who had spent the war interred at Weixian. Several people had climbed the water tower and erected an American flag that they had prepared specially for the occasion. The celebrations began.
哇，我们手就举起来了，喊呐，当然他们听不到。那么这个飞机就盘旋在上空，大概飞过来有6次、7次，他们知道已经到了目的地，也看见我们在下面。突然，下面的门开了，7个人就跳伞。
The plane made a low-altitude pass, and 7 fully armed U.S. paratroopers jumped out, landing in a cornfield not half a mile from the camp. This is a picture of the scene taken by Heng Anshi, son of Heng Liddil. A keen amateur photographer, Huang had been hiding in the field and managed to capture a precious piece of history.
I said, I'll be the first person out of 1,400 prisoners. I'll be the first one to get to the gates of the camp. And when I got to the gates of the camp, 1,399 people got there before I got there. The prisoners were wild. They were crying, they were screaming, they were hugging, they were dancing. They were down on the ground, pounding their fists on the ground. They were waving. Men took their shirts off, were waving as this plane kept circling around, dropping supplies.
Manna from heaven. It was wonderful. The most exciting day of my life. And for anybody that you ask about that was at Weixian, it was the, you could never live anything like that again. Freedom, after all those years.
On the afternoon of August 17, 1945, the soldiers assigned to the Duck Mission took off from Kunming in a B-24 bomber. After landing in Weixian, they immediately approached the camp in battle formation. They were surprised to be greeted not by resistance from the Japanese guards, but by a rapturous welcome from the camp's inmates.
And these were our heroes, these 7 men. Oh, what excitement! What excitement! And, they came into camp and they expected they might have trouble. Some of the campers, I've read, had knives in case there were difficulties to keep the Japanese at bay. But there was no trouble. They just handed over, and the Americans took over our camp.
They came down, and we immediately, the band was asked to assemble at the front gate. So we all brought our instruments, and then we played the national anthems of I think, America and Britain and Holland and China and all these different countries. And of course, everyone enjoyed that. Great moment.
The instruments that had been smuggled into the camp 3 years earlier by Joyce's father and others had always inspired those around them. The victory medley composed by the band members themselves became the sweetest music that the camp's inmates had ever heard.
And when they got to that part, oh, say, does that star-spangled banner still wave o'er the land of the free and the home of the brave? The young American Major Stanley Steiger just slipped down from the shoulders to a standing salute. And a young American trumpet player just fell down on the ground and began to cry because he knew what we all knew, we were free.
The bravery of the 7 paratroopers who liberated Weixian, who were known as the Guardian Angels, and who arrived in a B-29 nicknamed the Armored Angel, immortalized Weixian. Their buttons, badges, and even pieces of their parachutes were snatched up by the inmates as souvenirs. They signed autographs, and one little girl even cut off pieces of their hair. Children followed them through the streets, into the cafeteria, and even into the bathrooms, never for a moment letting them out of sight. Wang Chenghan, the mission's Chinese translator, was also the focus of attention. Along with his 6 teammates, he risked his life to free people he did not even know, something for which he will be forever remembered as a hero. With the war over and long years of imprisonment at an end, the day of the camp's liberation became the most important of their shared memories. Eventually, the excitement settled down and life went on. But after so many years of war and imprisonment, things could never really be the same. For the people in the camp, there were no sad farewells. When it came time to leave, they quietly packed away the pain they had endured, along with their belongings. Their struggles were things that many chose not to remember, instead letting them fade away into dust-covered memories. Weixian's inmates returned home, some to their home countries, others back to the lives they had created for themselves in China. Despite the years in the camp, China was still home to many of the inmates, the place where they were born and raised, and a place they would always carry with them in their hearts.
I remember at Hong Kong, we were leaving, and most people were downstairs doing things on the deck. I was on the deck, looking at the older town, crying. Nobody else was. I think they probably felt it, but I wanted to see China right to the last, until I couldn't see it anymore. All I could see was sea. But every day, my mind goes back to China, thinking about it. I had such an interesting early life there.
Suffering is a good teacher. It hurts, but it also rescues and redeems. The suffering endured by the Weixian inmates can never be forgotten. Yet the side of their suffering was also the side of their purification. And every Weixian inmate emerged from the camp a wiser person.
经过那5年半是很痛苦的经过，但是走出来以后，就发现是何等宝贵的一种的经历，人生难忘的，并且是塑造一个新的人生，一个新的人。我们在集中营的时候，无论是爷爷，是老师，是这些朋友，是同学，我们都在一个绝望的情况的里面。可是因为有一种爱，能够帮助我们渡过难关，胜过绝望，走上光明的道路。
James Taylor, spent 25 years in Taiwan as a teacher and youth educator, and 11 years in Singapore before returning to Hong Kong. But wherever he goes, he takes the lessons of Weixian with him and lives in service of others. His Yantai Zhifu classmate Stephen went to Japan after the war in the spirit of forgiveness.
Big room like this.
Inspired by his own teacher, Eric Liddil, he wanted to bring love to the country that had hurt him. Janet's family left Shanghai in 1949 and lived in Hong Kong for 3 years. But her father's weak heart did not respond well to Hong Kong's climate. And in 1952, they returned to Belgium. Her father, a photography enthusiast, took many pictures of the family's happy life after the war. Weixian was kept hidden in their memories, but the time they spent there was never far from their hearts.
We were liberated. I was very afraid because my world had come to an end. Because the first time I left camp to go for a walk with the Dutch friends, I felt dizzy. I felt there are no walls. What's happening? It was very difficult to readapt afterwards to everyday life.
World War II has been over for 60 years, and the pain and loss have gradually become part of history.
Well, this is a parachute that came down from a B-29 with certainly a can of food, and every person in camp, when everything was finished, every person in camp received one section of a parachute. We were 5 in the family, and we received 5 sections. And since the war, well, we kept this parachute very preciously. For us, it is a symbol of our liberty. And there we are. It's a family treasure. You will keep it for many years.
Please serve yourself.
The Westerners who lived at Weixian were not physically abused, but the psychological strain and the lack of fundamental rights they suffered left invisible scars on each of the camp's over 2,000 inmates. For Janet's younger brother, Pander, who entered the camp aged 2 and left at 5, Weixian survives only as broken bits of memories. To help make sense of what he was too young to remember, he has devoted considerable energies to sorting through documentary evidence pertaining to the camp.
I found Father Anquet was also an adventure. I found him by our national TV corporation. And when he told me that he held me in his arms when I was 2 years old in Weihsien.
Really?
I say, but that is extraordinary. Tell me about Weihsien. And he told me stories about Weihsien. And I heard so much about Weihsien at that time. I found friends from Weihsien, and I started to study internet and to try and make a website. And now the website is very big, 700 megabytes big.
Yeah.
With drawings, paintings, pictures.
After returning home, Weixian's internees began to record and collect materials about life at the camp, trying to decipher its larger significance. They will never forget the time they spent there, but they wanted to do more than just remember it. If they could use their experiences to gain insight into the human condition, then other people could benefit from them as well. The inmates started to contact one another and encourage each other to share the secrets and often painful memories. They created the Weixian Internees Association, established their own website, and wrote memoirs. Many have revisited the site of the camp, including former U.S. Ambassador to China, Arthur Hummel. Sunderland Smollett, who was born in the camp and is the wife of a former Citibank vice president, has established a scholarship. And the Liddil Foundation has helped the city of Weifang build athletic facilities. Former New Jersey legislator Mary Previtt made it her mission to locate the 7 duck team members who liberated the camp and to stay in touch with them or their widows. She is still looking for Wang Chenghan, the mission's Chinese interpreter. Of the 7 brave soldiers who risked their lives to save the inmates, he is the only one she has yet to find. In August 2007, Simon Clegg, the CEO of the British Olympic Committee and leader of the British 2008 Olympic delegation, visited the site of the Weixian camp to mark the 1-year countdown of the Beijing Olympic Games. Standing in front of a granite monument shipped over from Britain, he paid tribute to the Olympic champion Eric Liddil and the shared memories of the Chinese and British citizens united by the camp. A museum has been erected on the original campsite by the Weifang municipal government. It attracts people from all over the world who come to remember and pay their respects. In China, Weixian is the most widely known and largest of the foreign internment camps. It was the wartime home to many well-known people, including the 2nd U.S. Ambassador to the PRC, Arthur Hummel, Shandong University founder Watson M. Hayes, advisor to Chiang Kai-shek, Raymond J. DeJager, and Olympic champion Eric Liddil, who inspired the movie chariots of fire. For Weixian's children, the camp was a prison, but also an invaluable learning opportunity, the kind that can only be born in adversity. Cold, hungry, and faced with the constant threat of death, they were taught not to complain, not to blame others, not to hate, and not to feel sorry for themselves. Instead, they learned to maintain their dignity, be generous with their praise, make sacrifices for the common good, and be thankful to be alive. The pain and suffering has been transformed into spiritual wealth, sustaining both themselves and their descendants. To them, Weixian has become their second spiritual home.